Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's talk, which is the first in a series of 4 on the topic of facilities management. It follows on from the series of 4 that we had on reliability engineering and asset management in October. And there seems to be a good appetite for sharing information in that space. I'm seeing a couple of the familiar faces back again in February. I suppose before I go any further, I should point out the usual phones to silent, please. I did say phones to silent, please, because there's usually someone that ignores you. The fire exits, usual places back at the room, and the doors that you came in. For those of you who are out there in the web, watching online, you can do whatever you like with your phones. The presentation is being recorded and should be uploaded to Engineers Ireland YouTube channel in due course, and the slides will be made available by the speaker for download in PDF format after tonight's talk. That pre-answers the questions that are going to be asked. Denny, sorry, I should mention also it's a collaboration between Engineers Ireland, META, the Institute of Workplace Facilities Management, and the Institute of Asset Management. And 2 of those are growing bodies in this organisation, and there's a lot of expertise that's sailing under the radar in recent years that's only just starting to show itself, and it's good to be able to share that. Danny O'Mahony here works with Arup in Cork in their facilities management team, and he's got some useful information to share with us on the outsourcing of maintenance contracts. Thank you.
Right, thanks guys, thanks for showing up. First I just want to say thanks to Engineers Ireland and Padre in particular for facilitating the talk this evening, and also I want to say thanks to everyone who was involved in organising the talk. There's an awful lot of work that goes on in behind the scenes that you kind of wouldn't see, so I appreciate everyone's efforts. Bad start.
It's engineers.
Right, so the agenda for this evening will be background for facilities management, outsourcing maintenance contracts, compliance overview, maintenance strategy, facilities maintenance outsourcing models, maintenance resourcing, tender processes, contracts and service level agreements, operations management, and references and questions. So background, what's it all about? So facilities management has been around for well over 50 years before my time, and it started off being led with tools, say maintaining a boiler or a piece of equipment. Then over time it evolved to maintaining systems, and then it evolved to making sure that all the systems in the workplace were up and running. So BIFM was founded about 25 years ago, and that's when facilities management was first recognised as a professional body in this area. And it's continued to grow over time. It's continued to grow over the past 25 years. The last 12 months have been the most progressive in facilities management history for 2 main reasons. The first one is that BIFM have rebranded themselves as the Institute of Workplace and Facilities Management, which embraces the workplace, trying to make sure that the workplace is a good environment for all building users, and also they're looking to change chartership status. Dermot Walsh, Via, and Eugene O'Callaghan from Johnson Controls will be giving an overview in the next 2 weeks of how their organisations have evolved, or how the facilities management in their organisations has evolved over time. So the next big milestone for facilities management in the last 12 months was the introduction of an ISO standard. I'm sure you're all familiar with ISO 9001 or ISO 14001. So now there's a recognised industry standard for facilities management, which is looking to standardise systems and processes around the globe. My colleague Conor Cooney will be giving a talk on the ISO 41000 standard in a couple of weeks' time also. So just an extract from an article I read in the Irish Times a couple of weeks ago really kind of struck me. The facilities management market in Ireland is worth 1.2 billion at the moment, and the industry sector has a forecasted growth of 11% globally, so it has no signs of showing down. It's, next one now is outsourcing maintenance and compliance. So what is outsourcing? Outsourcing is an agreement where one company hires another company to provide a service that they could do it themselves, but they decide to get it done by an external company. So what are the factors driving the need to outsource? So the key factors are to allow the organisation to focus on their key competencies, cost saving, and that you could have more skilled workforce. So this is an example of a facilities management agreement. So basically the client or the organisation can concentrate on their primary process, and they'll specify a service level agreement of what they want from the external service provider, and then the external service provider will meet that SLA for a fee, and their performance will be measured through key performance indicators. So why do we maintain equipment? So the key points are to comply with legislation, maximize plant utilization, and minimize downtime. So what should a planned maintenance system include? It should include a list of the items to be maintained, the resource type that's required to maintain it, and how often the equipment will be maintained and the tasks associated with each item of equipment. So the following is an example of a maintenance asset register that's required for setting out maintenance schedules. So you have your floor, room name, system, component, and the number of components in that particular area. So now everyone's favourite topic, compliance. So your legal obligations in relation to testing of equipment and machinery. So you statutory inspections, Irish standards, and ISEN standards are all they're all statutory obligations, so you have to do them. And then you've code of practice and British standards, which aren't mandatory, but they're still recommended to be complied with. So following is an overview of a number of life safety systems that have to be maintained. So you've fire alarms, emergency lighting, and say lifts. And we're going to go on to maintenance strategies. So the considerations in formulating a maintenance strategy are: what are the implications of failure, what standby facilities are available, and what level of technical expertise are available on site, and what budget is available for undertaking the maintenance. So the following are a number of maintenance strategies. So one strategy is run to failure. If the cost of maintaining the equipment over say a year would cost more to maintain it than to replace it, then you just run it to failure and replace it as it fails. Then you're into planned maintenance. So before a fault, you can undertake scheduled maintenance, which would be, say, having someone out to maintain your boiler once a year or maintain your emergency lighting system 4 times a year. Opportunity-based maintenance would be, say, in a plant where the plant isn't running for a particular space of time, so you schedule your maintenance around then. And then condition-based maintenance is where you're monitoring the condition of the equipment and you schedule your maintenance based on the requirements. After a fault, then reactive or corrective maintenance can be undertaken also. So choosing your maintenance strategy. So if the service is essential, if there's a health and safety risk, and if it's cheaper to maintain it than replace it, you use planned maintenance. If it's not cheaper to replace it, or maintain it, then replace it. You'll use run to failure. If there's if resources are available on site, you'll condition monitor it, and if they're not, you'll design up to maintenance. So I thought it was an example of how risk failure will be managed, and examples of the maintenance priorities and response times. So you measured the consequence and likelihood of a failure. So if an item of equipment has a low consequence of failure and a low likelihood of failure, then there's no panic with maintaining it, and that will come under a priority 4. So for example, if the dishwasher in your office went down, if something had a high consequence of failure and a low likelihood of failure, there may still be a priority 1. So an example of that would be, say, the data center in our office, which is responsible for keeping 170 engineers going, or not data center, but server. And then something that would have a high consequence of failure and a high likelihood of failure might be a boiler that's gone past its life expectancy and it's due to fail any time, so you put a plan in place straight away to replace that boiler before it fails. Then the response times. So a priority 1 needs to be made safe within 1 hour and restored within 2 hours. Priority 2 needs to be made safe within 4 hours and restored within 24 hours. Priority 3 needs to be investigated and made safe as soon as possible and repair within 7 days. And priority 4, you investigate within 1 week and repair within 1 month. So following are a number of FM, or facilities maintenance outsourcing models. So a single service provider is where you have multiple contracts with many different service providers. So for example, you might have one for heating, one for ventilation, one for air conditioning, one for fire alarm, one for emergency lighting, etc. Then bundled services is where you bundle some of these. So you might have one mechanical maintenance contract, you might have one electrical maintenance contract. Total facilities management is where you combine everything into one contract. So you have all your mechanical and electrical maintenance under one contractor. Basically the rule is that the more contracts you have, the more time it takes to administer, the higher costs, and the more of the client management time is required, and then the less contracts, the opposite basically. And also there's another model then is where a client might get an FM consultant to come in and procure the contractor on their behalf. So let's go through. So we had clients a number of years ago that they had multiple contracts on site, and they brought us on board to streamline it. So first we procured a facilities coordinator on their behalf. The coordinator went on site, he determined what contracts they had, and put together an asset register for us. Then once we all had all that data, the client got us to put together an outsourcing strategy. So we considered bundle services first. We decided that wasn't suitable for this particular site. And then we went with a total facilities management contract. So we were able to take all the data that the facilities coordinator had on site and put that into a tender package and go to the market with it. This led to substantial savings, and the client kept us on board to manage that contract for them after for the past 2 years, and we're still there. Next is maintenance resourcing. So you can have input and output based specifications. So an input based specification would be you want one technician on site 1 day a month for 12 months to maintain a specific system. Then an output based specification would be you just want the contractor to make sure that that equipment is up and running 98% of the time, and it's down to them to determine what resources are required. SFG 20 is the industry best practice standard for maintaining equipment, and it specifies the resources required to maintain the equipment, the frequency at which the equipment should be maintained, and the tasks that should be undertaken. So here on the top left, we have the maintenance tasks and frequencies for an air handling unit. So there's a number of activities that has to be undertaken once a month, and some that has to be undertaken every 6 months. SFG 20 will also give you the amount of time that it should take to maintain each item of equipment at each interval, which will lead to an annual timing for that specific item of equipment. So for example, you can add all that up, and then you can determine how many man hours you need to maintain all your assets, which can be used for resource scheduling. So then you're left with the decision: will you outsource the labour, or will you bring people in house? So the advantages of outsourcing is that you have a flexible service, a better skill base, and you have no full-time employees. And the advantages of direct labour is that they'll be more familiar with the plant and equipment, and that there's potential for greater accountability. So there's legislation in place for protecting the employees, which is called the Transfer of Undertaking for the Protection of Employee Regulations 2/2006. So basically, this is to protect the employees so that they don't lose their jobs. If an outsourcing contractor is brought in, they have to go with the outsourcing contractor, or if there's a change in contractor, they'll switch over to the incoming contractor. Tender process. So these are a number of risks that can come into place when you're trying to tender a maintenance contract. So with stakeholders, you could have multiple stakeholders with different requirements. You could have changes of resources on, say, the tendering team over the course of the project. You might have the lack of data for putting together the tender documents, and changes to program or an unexpected quantity of tender returns. So the following is an outsourcing process from kind of determining your strategy to appoint your contractor. So on your preparation, you identify the need of the project. Pre-tendering phase, you select the type of procedure, you prepare the tender documents, prepare the specifications and award criteria, publish the tender, evaluate the tender returns, and sign the contract, and then you're into contract management, where you're managing the contractor on an ongoing basis. So these are public procurement thresholds, but private entities use similar guidelines. So for a tender below 5,000, you'll get one written quote. Between 5,000 and 25,000, you'll get 3 written quotations, and from 25,000 up to there's a threshold for once the contract value goes over a certain threshold, it has to go up on e-tenders and go up to Europe. So from 25,000 up to this particular threshold, it goes on e-tenders, and it's a national tender. And once it goes above this threshold, it goes up on OJEU, is called the official journal of the European Union, and anyone from Europe can tender for it. So these are the thresholds for the official journal of EU. So for government departments and offices, it's a contract above 144,000. For local and regional authorities, over 221,000, and for utilities, it's over 443,000. So there's 4 main types of tendering. That's open tendering, restrictive tendering, competitive dialogue, and negotiated tendering. So on an open tender, it's a one-stage tender process. There's no limit to the amount of tenderers that can come back, and only tenderers that pass, say, certain minimum requirement criteria, which might be tax clearance, insurance, health and safety requirements, will actually be assessed. A restrictive tender is a two-stage process. The first stage involves a qualitative assessment of the applicant's suitability, so again, such as tax clearance, insurances, compliance. And the second stage involves a detailed evaluation of how the tenderer is going to fulfill the requirements. Competitive dialogue is rare enough, I haven't come across it, but it's a three-stage tender process where you outline suitability, then you conduct a dialogue process with potential tenderers, and then you have a formal tender process. And a negotiating procedure is similar to a restricted procedure where it's still a two-stage process, but at the end the client has the ability to negotiate the contract. So features of a pre-qualification questionnaire, so basically, as I said before, minimum requirements, tax clearance, insurance, health and safety, are the minimum requirements, and then you might evaluate, say, the project experience and the resources that are going to undertake the job. So after tender stage, there's a thing called the most economically advantageous tender, the meat tender. So it's where you combine your technical technical submission with the cost to give you the best solution for this job. So in this instance, you have the person who had the lowest cost came second, but the person who had the best overall submission had a higher cost, but they had a better technical submission, so they would meet the client's requirements better. Following an example of a mobilisation plan, it's kind of hard to see, but basically you need to make sure that the contract is set up right from the start. So you need to make sure that all meetings and reporting are kind of set up in advance, and that all site inductions, health and safety, etc. are set up from the beginning, because if they're not set up from the start, generally they're never set up. So contracts and service level agreements. So why do you have a contract? So to form a legally binding framework which can include a service level agreement, allow for changes, set out the payment terms, and allow for termination. So partnering facilities management. So it's very important that the client and the contractor can get into a partnership approach, so that win-win solutions can be taken advantage of by both parties, which will lead to cost reduction, quality improvements, and improved service delivery. So what is a service level agreement? It's an agreement between a client and a service provider, quantifies the minimum acceptable service standard. So for example, boilers shall be operational a minimum of 98% of office work hours. So what should a service level agreement include? So the name of each party, roles and responsibilities of each, scope of services to be provided, the location, and the quality and performance related targets. So typically, service level agreement measures include availability, reliability, serviceability, and a response time. So the benefits of an SLA is that it increases the accountability of service provider and provides clarity on what's supposed to be provided. And a disadvantage is that it can restrict partnership if it's too onerous. So the key to a successful contract is that it's managed properly, that you set out your meeting scheduling, reporting requirements in your service level agreement, and that these are adhered to. So for example, getting a monthly report from a contractor outlining what they did, and then meeting them once a month to go through the monthly report. So if the contractor's performance starts to drop, you can flag it straight away before it goes too low. And again, if the contractor has an issue, they can bring it to the client's attention before it becomes a major issue. So this is an example of how the dynamic cycle can be applied to facilities maintenance contracts. So your plan is putting together your specifications, your service level agreements. The do is the contractor actually doing the job. The checking is auditing and measuring the results. And the act is communicating the results of or the findings of the audits to the contractor and putting improvement plans in place if required. So following are a number of key performance indicators that can be used in a maintenance contract. The main items are, was the maintenance that was supposed to be carried out? Was it carried out on time? And was there any unnecessary failures to the equipment? Another item that should be taken into account when producing tender documents is putting your demobilization plan into the tender for the expiry of the potentially new contract, and this can avoid a loss of valuable and business critical information at the termination of the contract. So it's just a number of reference documents that I went through putting together the presentation. So EN 15221, SIBSI Guide N, SFG 20, BISRIA Guide, IWFM Outsourcing Good Practice Guide, and Office of Government Procurement Outsourcing Guidelines. So thanks very much. Any questions? Yeah.
Yeah. If I go back to the contracting structure, whether it was individual contracts or
yeah. Shall we go back to it there?
There's no only ingredients involved. How well in practice do you find that the single source facilities management contract works?
Depends on the entity procuring it, really. I mean, if you have one building, then it makes no sense to have multiple service providers. But if you have a very large property portfolio, then you might want to get the best of each class in to maintain your equipment.
And tell me, if you take that into the industrial sphere, where the facility that you're managing is a factory.
Yeah.
That I suppose the dividing lines between what's a facility and what's production might not always be completely clear, because you may have facilities, some aspects of the facilities that are very critical to production, and production is the only thing that matters on a site like that. What's your approach there?
So in that instance, you'd have, say, a total facilities management contractor to maintain all your non-critical equipment, but you'd have a separate contract with any contractor that has to maintain equipment that's critical to your organization. So you want to have the control over that yourself. You don't want it to be channeled through a third party.
So can you repeat that, please? Sorry.
So you might have a total facilities management contract. So you'd have one contract for all your non-critical equipment, and then for your critical equipment, you take out a separate contract on that, so that you have control over that contract.
Okay. And is there any structure or facility part of it for managing that small contract through your overall company?
Yeah, so you can, it's a small bit tricky in public procurement, but in private procurement, you can specify, I want this particular contractor, and then they'd have to go with them, because that's your requirement. You can say that you're not going to get the contract unless you take this contractor on board.
Meet, and not just because we're in this, but the scoring system that you put up there right now, So this presentation is relatively simple.
Yeah,
Do they get quite complex?
they would, yeah.
Yeah. Are they, in your experience, are they completely objectively laid out before bids are received?
No, so in my experience, basically the cost is what it is. You have to go through it, you have to make sure that there's no abnormalities. But then if you have a contractor that really wants the job, they'll tender their submission to make sure it meets the client's needs. Whereas you'd have other contractors that will just throw in generic material. So it's important that the quality of the submission is assessed.
Okay. And from a viewer and Arup's perspective, what type of scoring systems do you use? Are there any in the standards? I'm not familiar with the standards that you've quoted tonight, or
Yeah.
is it in-house stuff that you've developed?
In-house stuff that we developed, just leaning on our own expertise and knowledge.
Did you ever come across a contract that's more paying a penalty than fixing the equipment?
I suppose no one kind of likes to invoke any penalties or anything like that. Like generally, you try to work with the contractor to try to get it back on board. Because once you start invoking penalties, the next step is more penalties, and the next step is termination. So it's in everyone's best interest to put in the effort and get it back up and running.
And do people renegotiate contracts, or when you move from one, say, facility manager to another one?
How do you mean, sir?
Can you renegotiate a contract halfway through?
In public procurement, you can't, and I'm not so sure about private procurement.
And when you change, say, from one facility management to the other,
Yeah.
is the legacy issue, who sorts out that way?
Generally, you get a condition survey done before the existing contractor goes out, so that the new contractor that comes in will have a good idea of the condition of the equipment that they're taking on. Yeah.
What are the typical lengths of the contracts? Are they annual or 5 year?
Typically, it's 3 years with the option to extend for a further 2 years. So, like, I mean, the industry is evolving so fast. Like, generally, after 5 years, the top contractors are going to be after changing. So, it's a good length for a contract.
You mentioned the example there where KPI will be working with their flexibility. The contracts have changed, the KPIs that goes through.
Yeah, like generally the best KPIs are ones that are agreed between the service provider and the client to make sure that you're measuring the right thing. Generally, as I said, you want a partnership approach, so it's better to make sure it's meeting the client's needs first, but then the contractor can actually deliver them. And some contracts we've seen, the KPIs are very aspirational, and the contractor has no chance of meeting them.
Just another question is, you mentioned the critical equipment. How is that procured through this contract?
So basically, you have a clause in the service level agreement saying, so if the equipment is, sorry, in which way do you mean? As in the likelihood and consequence of failure, or do you mean what Audrey was saying about critical equipment?
Yes, so if a piece of equipment it transpires that it needs to be replaced, might be a significant sum of money, let's say. Whose responsibility is it for sourcing and procuring that piece of equipment?
That's a good question. So it's a very big trend in recent years that public entities and private entities are procuring minor works through their facilities management contractor, and it makes sense that the facilities management contractor provides this sort of, undertakes the minor works because they're familiar with the plant, they're familiar with the site, and they're going to be maintaining it after. So it makes perfect sense. So it's down to the client to get the budget, and then the service provider can give a quote to the client for that work. So it also depends on the value of the work. That the entity may have their own procurement guidelines that look, if it's over 50 grand or something like that, they might have to go through their own procurement procedures.
Just ask that comment. We've seen in the past there are two different types of contracts. So we have simplified, we've got familiar with this comprehensive contracts also. whereby something like audiovisual equipment, which is prone to failure and has a shorter lifespan. And in that regard, say that some clients would look to put a comprehensive contract in place, where if anything fails, the contractor will then be fully responsible for replacement of that. With that though comes, triple the cost, because in effect they have to pay for insurance premium on top of that. So you do pay for the service, but you also pay for it obviously financially as well as the premium service.
Does it come a point at which you're just paying for the provision of something as opposed to the actual object?
It's equipment as a service in effect. Exactly, yeah. The asset as a service.
How to exceed?
Sorry, there's a clarification there on some of the critical equipment question earlier. Like I work for a manufacturing facility as a facilities engineer, and about 70% of our equipment, while it wouldn't really care, is directly impacting production.
Okay.
So like we have to maintain that uptime 100%, can never shut down. We're in kind of a transition period where we're thinking about going to outsourcing facilities management, which you're saying in your experience, you recommend going single source for that 70%?
You'd have to do a proper assessment of the requirements and put together a strategy for it. So one strategy might be you'd outsource it, but you'd outsource it in phases where, say, a facilities management contractor will come in and then they might, start using their own resources for lower risk items, and then if they got on okay with the lower risk items, they might start increasing, but you'd have to phase it out over time. You couldn't just switch it over overnight because the risk would be far too high.
Yeah, and like, are those facilities management companies happy with using kind of the existing service provider? For instance, now like we have compressors that they can only be serviced by the manufacturer. We say FDA recommends you do it that way, and we have to do it that way from a regulatory point of view.
Okay.
Would they be happy with keeping that, or would they want to put in their own people most of the time?
But if it's a regulatory requirement, they won't have a choice.
Yeah,
But,
we say regulatory, but regulatory likes it that way. I don't think it has to be that way.
It's when the FDA said they like something, that means you do it that way.
right. Okay. Look, I suppose basically how it works is the facilities management contractor will provide a subcontractor to you, and they'll put their percentage management fee markup on top of that. So I mean, they'll bring in anyone that you want because they'll get their management fee.
That makes sense.
I wonder, like we have rules on kind of design build operate where the same company, not just a facilities management, but they've actually built the facility, obviously it's the facility.
Yeah.
Is that as good as it would seem, or are there issues with it?
I have an awful amount of experience in it, but I know that the service level agreements for, say, the PPPs are very, very stringent. So the facilities management contractor has to deliver a very, very high service because the penalties in those contracts are really, really high.
What type of a situation where the facility weren't engaging the likes of Arup to manage the contract? Give me an example.
We have a client, they're a public body, they have a nationwide property portfolio. So they have a number of office buildings, and it's not that they don't have the expertise in house to manage their buildings. It's just that they literally don't have time. So it makes sense for them to come in and get Arup to manage the buildings for them. So say, for example, the contractor might be giving them a 20-page monthly report. Then we'll review that monthly report and give the client a 2-pager. Just condense it, basically the KPIs of a slight summary.
Does Arup do manufacturing facilities, the kind of place that
we were very heavily involved in manufacturing facilities from a design purpose, and we have some experience from say maintenance management point of view, but we wouldn't have as much experience as our design counterparts would have.
I think that was, judging by the level of questions that came, there was quite a lot of interest in that. I'd like to thank Danny for a very informative and very direct and very practical lecture tonight. And there is quite a lot of material that you skimmed over in the slides, I think, quite quickly, so that was good reading for after tonight. So I think it would be, for us, a bit show our appreciation and use the format for that.